Hi, I'm Nell Duke from the University of Michigan, and I'm here to give a presentation on small group reading instruction at a distance. First things first, I want to thank you, all of the educators out there who are watching this video and all the educators out there who are not watching this video. I want to thank you for your tremendous support of our children in this difficult time, the truly heroic actions that you are taking to do the best that you can do for the children of our country. Thank you. There have been tributes pouring in to teachers, and there's so many that I've enjoyed watching, but I have a special love for this one from John Krasinski in the Some Good News broadcast.
We here at SGN would like to start a petition that all teachers get paid $1.71 million per day.
My intent in sharing this presentation today is really to share some recommendations and information related to technology and using that for distance learning, combined with some recommendations and information about effective small group literacy instruction for young children. So I'm trying to combine those into one seamless presentation. My approach is relatively low tech on purpose. I'm showing what you can do just using a video conferencing platform. I've chosen to use Zoom and some online texts and no other resources for the purposes of the lesson. I've also tried to make sure that I stay true to what we know about research aligned instructional practice in small group literacy instruction for young children. I acknowledge the equity issues here. We have far too many children in this country who still don't have access to digital devices and or to high-speed internet access, which would make a lesson like the ones that I'll be presenting today impossible for them. All I can say about that is that I know that there is a lot of effort being made in many, many states and districts to try to rectify that situation. And so I hope that this lesson will be increasingly applicable to a wider variety of geographic areas and children across this country. I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of the steps that I'll be taking in today's presentation. I'll finish up some introductory comments, and then I'm actually going to walk you through a phonics lesson and show both how I use the technology and how I use effective literacy instruction in the course of that lesson. Then I'll have a much shorter time where I share a second lesson that's more focused on comprehension and writing. And then finally, I'll close with the opportunity to hear reflections of some literacy coaches who participated with me in the presentation. So before the small group reading lesson would begin, a few things I'd want you to do. First, just carefully considering whether small group is the right format for the lesson. We know from research, a lot of different kinds of studies, that small group instruction is a very powerful instructional tool, but at the same time, it does come at a cost. So we don't want to use small group reading instruction when whole group would work just fine. We want to really find those times when we could take advantage of the smaller ratio between student and teacher as the time to make use of small group reading instruction. You'll have formed small groups based on several factors. First of all, development. So for example, what you know about the typical order of acquisition of phonics elements. And based on standards, for example, when we expect children to know vowel teams. And finally, and most importantly, by knowing each individual student's strengths and weaknesses. So I'm advocating here a needs-based and flexible grouping approach in which we mix and remix groups on an ongoing basis in order to best meet children's needs at any given time, and based on what we know about that child, their interests, their strengths, their weaknesses, and so forth. In this case, it would make sense to have ascertained strengths and weaknesses or strengths and needs in instruction through observation and assessment that looks at kids' phonics knowledge. So for example, the informal decoding inventory, which is available for free, just Google informal decoding inventory, and is a research validated tool for learning about children's decoding development. That would be a great tool to use to inform your grouping or the formation of the group for this lesson. Again, your groupings are going to be flexible, mixing and remixing groups, sometimes based on children's interests, sometimes based on their strengths and needs, and always being flexible and nimble as we group children for instruction. If you'd like to learn more just in general about effective small group instruction without a particular focus on distance contexts, I recommend the literacyessentials.org K-3 Essential Number 3 module, which is all about small group instruction. If you want to learn more about foundational skills instruction, which will be the focus of the first lesson I demonstrate, or comprehension and writing instruction, which will come in on the second lesson that I share with you today, please see the What Works Clearinghouse practice guides on these topics. I'm very lucky to have with me today some literacy coaches who are here to both participate in the lesson as mock students and then to share some of their reflections on what they've heard and seen. So I'm going to introduce each one of them now. And let me see if I can, So Ruth Bench is an early literacy coach from Lenawee ISD in Michigan. Mila Lee is a coaching consultant in Michigan. And then Annie Spear is an early literacy coach from Core ISD in Michigan. And finally, Shannon Sweet is an early literacy coach for Calhoun ISD in Michigan. And I'm so grateful to the four of them for joining us for today's video. So now I'm going to show you how I would begin the lesson. So you can see here my students on the screen, and I've got them in what's called gallery view. So you have two kinds of view in Zoom, speaker view and gallery view. Speaker view looks like this, where the main speaker or last person to speak is centered. Gallery view, you see everyone equally. And so be aware of those two options. So I might start my meeting in gallery view. And as you can see, to begin with, my students are all muted. And that's a great technique to use if you want to make sure that background noise or other issues aren't interfering. But there are also times where you want students to be able to speak without having to remember to unmute. And so for this first part of the lesson, I'll want that. And therefore, I'm going to unmute all by clicking this button here. Okay, so let's imagine that I've checked in on students' social and emotional needs at another time earlier in the day or in another format. So I'm making sure to prioritize, especially with distance learning and especially in this era of COVID-19. I'm making sure that I'm prioritizing having social emotional interaction and check-ins and so forth with students and with their families. But for the purposes of this lesson, we'll imagine that that's already happened. So now I'll move over to, again, sharing my slides. So I'm sharing this PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint slide that I might have up to begin with could be this one, just reminding students that they have some materials that they need for this lesson, and it's a piece of paper and a pencil, pen, or marker. So I'd make sure that all the children have that ready. And then I'd move into this prompt. So you, many of you answered my email last week when I was asking you what you've been reading, and I thought it would be great for you to share some of what you've been reading with your classmates. Annie, let's start with you. You told me you've been reading Junie B. Jones books. So each child gets an opportunity to share about what they've been reading, and also an opportunity to make some comments about whether they would recommend what they're reading to their classmates. And this is valuable to help promote reading, create a reading culture, get some peer influence around reading. It's also an opportunity to expose children to additional sources of reading material, including a Minecraft website, 2 books, and the last child hadn't responded to my email in advance, we're imagining, but through conversation was able to share that she's reading Sports Illustrated for Kids, both online and off. So this is just a nice way to start a lesson, and then provides an opportunity to pivot to say that the lesson is going to help them learn to read those materials even better. So we're going to start today by doing some listening. We're going to listen for some sounds in words. And the sound that we're going to listen to especially is this sound, oi. The sound oi. First, let's just see if you can say that sound. Ruth, can you say oi for us?
Oi.
That's right. Mila?
Oi.
Shannon?
Oi.
And Annie.
Oi.
So you've all got that oi sound. You're all able to say that sound, and now we're going to try to hear that sound inside some words. So one of the things we want to really emphasize in teaching small group reading instruction online is having kids engaged in active responding. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that students could respond actively while listening for the oi sound in words. So one technique we can use is polling. I'll use that for my first example. Okay, so the first word I'm going to say is soil. Say soil to yourselves. Soil. And then I want you to think about whether you hear the oi sound in soil. I've got a poll up on the screen. If you hear oi in soil, then say yes. And if you don't hear oi in soil, say no. If you're not sure, say I'm not sure. So go ahead and respond to the poll now. Okay, and so as a teacher, I'm able to see that 3 of the 4 students thought they heard the oi sound in soil, but 1 did not. Now, one disadvantage of polling is that I can't see who didn't hear oi in soil, and sometimes that's okay, but at other times that's not ideal. So I'm going to show you another way of responding for our next example, which is the word pot. Okay, so for this example, I'm going to have the participants frame open on Zoom. And so with that participants frame there, you'll see that near the bottom, there's some options. Yes, no, go slower, go faster, more. And the more gives you a few key things you might want to know about for your more advanced Zoom users. A thumbs up, a thumbs down, a clap, and then need a break. So if children feel like they need a break, they would click that little coffee pot there. And then away, if for some reason someone has to step away, they can click that. But for our purposes, in terms of listening for the oi sound in pot, I'm just going to have the kids click yes or no. So you'll hear me demonstrate that now. Okay, the next word is pot. Do you hear the oi sound in pot? Click yes if you hear the oi sound and no if you don't hear the oi sound in pot. Pot. So Mila does not hear the oi sound in pot, as you can see on our screen. One of the reasons I like this responding format is because it does allow me to know which students are or are not getting whatever it is that I'm going over. And so that's an advantage of this particular responding format. So thanks very much for helping me demonstrate that, coaches. I'm going to show you one more responding format, and for this one I can close out my participants window or keep it open, doesn't really matter. But down at the bottom of the Zoom screen you'll see a button that says reactions, and you can teach students to use the reactions button as another way of responding depending on what you're teaching or asking about. So in this case I might say, okay, so for the next word is oink, oink. Can you give a thumbs up on your reaction button if you hear the oi in oink? Okay, thank you. And so viewers at home, you can see that that tells me that Ruth, Shannon, and Mila hear an oi and oink, and Annie does not hear an oi and oink. So this is another way you can get that kind of information. And if you're in a classroom where kids are used to thumbs up, that can be a useful tool. of course, another thing you can do is actually physically have the children put their thumbs up. And that works too. I just, in my experience, find that a lot of times kids love using these different features. Now, with any of the 3 methods I just showed you, whether it's polling, whether it's using the yes, no in the participant tab, or whether it's using the thumbs up and the reaction button, with any of these 3, of course, you're going to want to have had a session with children where you teach them to use these, and you'll probably have to remind them at times to do so. And you wouldn't switch like I did, of course, and do a different responding method for each item. You'd have run through these items pretty quickly with children using just one of those response formats. If you did choose to use the poll, you can relaunch and clear the same poll over and over again. So you could have used that same poll, what sound do you hear, many times. Okay, so now I'm going to head back to the PowerPoint to show you the next piece of the lesson. And I'm going to be focusing a little less now for a bit on the Zoom features and a little bit more on the instruction. So here we are. So we were listening for those sounds, the oi sounds, and if I needed to, I would reinforce for kids who are still struggling to hear it a little bit more about the sound. And then I would turn to my explicit instruction, and we know that explicit systematic instruction in phonics is very important for students and is an important part of a lesson. So I'm going to do a little explicit instruction here. So I would say to children, so that sound oi is in a lot of words, and we have 2 ways that we usually spell the oi sound. We either spell it with an OY, like in toy, or we spell it with an OI, like in coin. So an OY or an OI. Today, I'm just going to focus on the OI in coin. Would each of you say coin?
Coin. Coin.
So we listened for the oi in soil, and some of you heard an oi in soil. And so just as you might think, this is how we spell soil. We represent that oi sound inside soil with the O and the I. O-I for oi. Soil. Soil. And here's pot. Give me a thumbs up if you think there'll be an O-I in pot. Will there be an O-I in pot? Give me a thumbs up if you think there will be. Oh, Ruth says thumbs down. Thumbs down. Thumbs down. What do you think, Miley? Do you think there'll be an O-I sound in pot? Thumbs down. Nobody thinks there will be. Let's see. You're right. It's just P-O-T. Pot. Pot. That's right. If we put an O-I in there, it would be point. All right, now here's the sound a pig makes. Oink. Do you think that there'll be an O-I in oink? Give me a thumbs up if you think so. Okay, so as a teacher, I'm noticing we got all thumbs up there, but I also am seeing some delays. It's one thing to notice. Remember, the kids can see each other. So looking at the timing is also helpful as you're doing this kind of work. Okay, how about the word fall? Okay, let's see. Fall, F-A-L-L. And you might remember we did the all word family a while ago, like fall and tall and ball. And we don't hear an oi in those words, and we don't spell O-I in those words. Now here's a similar word, foil, like aluminum foil. And do you think that one's going to have an OI? Give me a thumbs up if you think so. And it sure does. So it has an F and an L just like fall, but in the middle it has the OI, and that tells us oi, foil. All right. Now I'm going to give you a chance to actually write some OI words. Okay, so viewers, at this point, I'm going to demonstrate another tool that we have in Zoom. So I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint again, put you back over into Zoom. go to share screen and click whiteboard. So this is a really useful tool. And again, Zoom is not the only video conferencing platform that has something like this. And here's the whiteboard. You can do various things with it. You can type out words using the text box. You can draw anything that you want, including letters. And you can use stamps and various other tools as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask Annie to write the word soil. So in order for Annie to write that, I'm going to need to give her control. So I'm coming down to the remote control area here, and I can give my mouse or keyboard control to any of the students. I'm going to choose right now to give it to Annie. So Annie, could you please write the word soil?
Going a little slow, but hopefully you're seeing it on your screen.
We are seeing it, Annie. Thank you. And so you can see that there she used the drawing tool. She wrote soil. This is a chance to get a student actively involved. They often really enjoy the tool of being able to write in this way. It's obviously not fabulous for handwriting practice, but it is very good for me being able as a teacher to both give them some practice and also as an assessment tool for me to see how they're doing with that. Now I'm going to clear that. And I'm going to change remote over to Ruth. And here I'm going to demonstrate a different tool, which is a text box. So I've created a text box on the screen. So as Ruth types letters on her keyboard, for the word pot, Ruth is the one we're going to write right now, pot. And you can see that works just like a basic text editor there. So you could see she was able to delete, to rewrite, and so forth. And there we have another way that you can have children writing on that whiteboard. So if we had time, and I'm just going to run through this, thank you so much, just orally for the sake of time, but I would go on to rotate among the kids, have someone write oink, and then I would do ink, onk, and oink, so that I could really talk about what that OI right next to each other does, as opposed to the I by itself or the O by itself. And then foil, and I would end with moist. And as often the case in small group instruction, and you'll be used to this if you do a lot of interactive writing with students as well, is I'm thinking about matching up the words to where I think that student is going to be challenged but successful. So for example, I might have chosen moist for Shannon because I know Shannon is probably going to hear and be able to represent that blend at the end of the word. So I'm always making strategic choices about children's participation as well. And again, these are both opportunities for instruction, but also opportunities for me to have an assessment tool in a sense. Okay, so I've demonstrated whiteboard, and I'm going to stop sharing the whiteboard now and move back over to my slides. Okay. And I'm going to put it in a mode where kids will be able to see the slides as large as possible. Okay, so I would say, right now, friends, we're going to practice using what we know about OI or OI by reading some riddles called What Is It? So here's the first riddle. We're going to see if you can figure out what this riddle is about. Ready? Okay, read with me. It is a type of pet. It has 4 legs. It has 1 tail. It barks. Okay, now stopping the instruction piece for a minute. When internet connections are not strong, that kind of choral reading is sometimes really hard to do in a video conferencing platform. If you find that's the case, what I recommend is actually muting students, encouraging them to read along, watching their mouths to see that they're doing it, but not actually having the sound so that we don't have all of that delay or messiness. Other times when the connections are fairly good, it actually can work out fine to do choral reading. Whenever I do choral reading, I want to do it multiple times with students. And here I've built in a reason to do that. Okay, so I know that some of you have a guess as to what this is, but let's read it one more time, and don't say what you think it is. By the way, viewers, I should have said that from the beginning, because you know by now one of the kids will have shouted out what it is. So anyway, don't say what it is. You're gonna have a chance to tell us that in a minute, but let's read it one more time to make sure what you think it is what it actually is. So let's read it all together. Ready? What is it? It is a type of pet. It has 4 legs. It has 1 tail. It
Barks.
And right there, another little trick that I find useful is for you to stop, not be always reading, because it's much easier to hear which of your students is reading along with you if you're not also reading. So you can kind of go in and out with your own, as a teacher, with your own reading. Okay, so now I think you all have a guess. We've reread it to check whether our guess might be true. And now I'm going to give you a chance to tell us what you think it is. Wait in the box. Okay, so viewers, what I'm doing now is I'm using the chat function in Zoom, and I find that to be one of the most helpful features in Zoom for working with kids for a couple of reasons. One is that it allows me to see what each child is thinking, but the other is it's just more writing practice. So, so everybody go into your chat box and type in what you think it is. Okay, great. Now it is true that the way this is structured, they are seeing all of each other's responses. If you don't want it that way, you just need to teach the kids to toggle this so that they're just giving, I don't have this option because I'm me, but so that they're just directing it to me. Similarly, I can chat to just Ruth, to just Mila, to just Shannon, or just to Annie. So if you want them to see each other's, I'm happy for them to see each other's in this case, then the way we did it is fine. If you don't want them to see each other's, then you just have to have them toggle ahead of time to have just me be the recipient, and then I'm the only one who will see each of their responses. So that's a way to be able to use the chat box during a lesson. Okay, thanks. And now I'll go back to our PowerPoint again. Okay. Now I have 2. Did you like those riddles? What did you think? Mila, what did you think of that riddle?
I liked it. It was, I'm glad you added a little bit more, because with every step, it was like, okay, you just clarified it a little bit more, because it was just on the first line, I could have chosen a whole bunch of different animals.
Oh, that's an interesting point. Let's go back and take a look at that. So if I say it is a type of pet, what could it be besides a dog? What could it have been, Shannon?
A fish, maybe.
Yeah, it could have been a fish. But then you read the next part, it says it has 4 legs. Well, fish doesn't have 4 legs, so you know it's not a fish. But what could it have still been that's not a dog? What do you think, Annie?
Could have been a cat.
It could have been a cat, right. And then I read it has 1 tail. Well, a cat has 1 tail too. But then this one kind of gives it away. Ruth, what did you think when you read it barks?
Well, then I knew for sure it was a dog.
For sure it was a dog, right. So now you're going to get to do 2 more of these what is it's, and they're a bit harder than the one you just did. So you're going to have to be really thinking. I want you to read out loud. I'm going to listen to each one of you one at a time. When you have a guess about what it is, I want you to write it on your paper. Can you hold up your paper, please? Okay, so I see that everybody has some paper, and you can write on your paper when you have a guess. Okay, now this is low tech, but again, I promised I would be low tech. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually just gonna paste the links to the two What Is It texts into the chat box. Another really useful function, of the chat box in Zoom is that you can just chat a link in there, and then all the students have to do is click it. So I'm going to chat box one link, and then I'm going to chat box a second link, and that way the kids can click to get each of the links. And if I were doing this better, I would have written one text and put the link, and then another text and click the link, but you get the idea. Okay, now I'm going to demonstrate how you can use Zoom features to be able to listen in on children reading aloud, just as you might if you were with them in a small group reading instruction lesson live. And so that you can still be both hearing their reading and also coaching them as they read and discussing what they've read with them individually. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to open the breakout rooms. Now, you'll find breakout rooms at the bottom of your screen under More, and you only will have this option if you are the meeting host. So make sure that you've set up a meeting where you're the host. So the coaches who are on this call are actually not able to set up the breakout rooms. Only I am as the host. So with breakout rooms, what you're doing is you're basically creating what it sounds like virtual spaces that are only populated by a subset of the people in the call. So I'm going to use 4 breakout rooms so that each of my students is now in a separate room. Now, when you assign breakout rooms, you can use an automatic or a manual style. We're going to skip that point for now because it's the same when you have 4 students in 4 rooms, and I'll show you that feature a little bit later in the presentation today. So I'm now going to create my breakout rooms, and for my purposes here, I'm not going to name them because I already just have one student in each, and it's clear which is each. So I would let the kids know, okay, it's going to be time to start reading your What Is It. I want you to read them out loud, and I'll come visit you and listen in on what you're reading. So now each of them has accepted going into their breakout room, and what I'm going to do is then choose a room to join, and I would first like to hear from Annie, so I'm going to choose to go into Annie's room. What will happen at that point is I can hear Annie, Annie can hear me, but Ruth, Mila, and Shannon don't hear me, so it works out really well. So I'm going to join Annie's room now. And I've joined Annie's, room.
What is it? The point of it is to take people from place to place. When you turn it on, it makes
Annie, remember OI says oi.
Oh, right. Oi. Noise. It makes noise.
Thank you, Annie. And so there you'll see that I was coaching her by connecting where she was stuck to what I taught in the lesson. And that's one of the major reasons why I made sure that the text that she's reading has a lot of OI words in it. So I have that opportunity to reinforce and, if needed, coach on the letter-sound relationship that I've taught. Thank you so much, Annie. So at this point, I'm going to go to my breakout rooms, and I'm going to leave Annie's room. And I'm now going to enter Ruth's room. And Ruth will see that I've joined her room. Oh, Ruth will see that I've joined her room, very likely on her screen, depending on how and where she has her Google Doc. And then I am just going to be then listening in.
It is not as big as a bus. What is it? It is not as big as a bus.
Ruth, what do you think it is?
I think it might be a car.
A car. What part really made you think it was a car?
Well, I think because it says it is not as big as a bus, and a car is smaller than a bus. So yeah, I think it's a car.
All right, thank you. Keep reading, and I'll see you in a little bit in the whole group, okay?
Okay.
And so here, I'm going to go to breakout rooms again. All right. Okay, so I'm going to leave breakout room 1. And I'm now going to enter the breakout room where Shannon is. Hi, Shannon, you can keep reading.
Okay. But you can't boil the water. It is noisy, but only once in a while. But only once in a while.
Shannon, I love what you did there. It didn't make sense to say, but only once in a wheel. You knew that didn't sound right. So you went back and you looked at that word a little bit more and you figured out that, what is that word? While. Thank you, Shannon. And so you're probably getting used to this by now, but the procedure would be, I'm then going to leave that room, return to the main session. And I'm going to visit, who haven't I visited? Mila. So I'm going to join Mila's room. Now by now, I'm guessing that Mila's done. Mila, are you all done reading?
I'm all done.
Okay. Mila, were there any words in what you read that gave you trouble?
There was one word. It was in the second riddle. It was the word answer and
Oh, yeah. I could see why that would give you trouble. That's a word we've been seeing sometimes in math, and that's the word answer.
Oh,
answer.
Okay. Answer.
Yeah. Can you go back and read that sentence now?
I'm going to go back and answer. Oh, there it is. If you don't know the answer, don't spoil it yet.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Mila, I'll see you in just a minute in the whole group, okay?
Okay, thank you.
So obviously this is a little clumsier than if you were doing this face-to-face, but it does give you the opportunity to listen in on your readers, and if they have a large amount to read, obviously that if they have a large amount to read, that obviously helps. Oops. I'm trying to close all rooms here. And you can set, see where it says all participants have been given 10 seconds. You can actually set the amount of time to be more or less before moving all of the participants back into the main room. So now they're all back. So yeah, this is a little clumsier than if you were just sitting with the children and could listen to each of them. On the other hand, you don't have to worry about the challenge that sometimes happens in small group reading instruction where kids' reading is interfering with one another's reading. We don't have that problem, so that's a positive. And if kids have longer text to read, you would be able to get through each of them before ending up like I did with Mila, where she was already all done reading. And also, of course, you don't have to listen to every child every time. Okay, so at this point in the lesson, I would pull the kids back together and go back to sharing my PowerPoint. And ordinarily, I would have them then, especially depending on how technology is working that day, if we seem to be pretty in sync, I might have them chorally read both of those two what is it's together again, just as a way to get more eyes on print, more reading practice, more exposure, especially to those OI words. And then what I would do is I would open up my chat box and tell the children, okay, now we're going to think about what you thought the answer was to the first riddle. And put in the chat box what you think the answer was to your first riddle. Before you type, change it where it says to, change it to my name. So just I see it. Change it to Ms. Duke. And then put what you think the answer was to the first riddle. Okay, so on my screen you can see that Shannon said car, Mila said car, Annie said motorcycle, and this is a beautiful answer, both because it gives me a chance to see some estimated spelling there, which can give me some ideas for where she is in terms of both hearing phonemes in the words and representing those phonemes appropriately with graphemes, and then we see that Ruth as well thought it was a car. So then I, at this point, would go back to the PowerPoint. All right, thank you for sharing what you thought that the answer was, and what something really interesting happened. Three of you said the answer that I was thinking of. One of you said an answer that wasn't the answer I was thinking of, but still makes sense. So the answer I thought it was car. I thought it was a car, but Annie said motorcycle. And Annie, I realized that it could be a motorcycle too. Motorcycle fits all the clues that were in it. Okay, now we're going to do the second riddle. Remember this one, the one that started there is water in it, but you can't boil the water? I'd like you to hold up your papers so I can see what you thought the answer to this riddle was. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to just scroll down so we can see all four of our coaches holding up their papers there. So what you see here is another, thanks for holding up your papers. You can put them down now. You all thought that it was a toilet, and that is what I was thinking of for this riddle that I wrote too, that it's a toilet. So viewers, one of the things you can see is that holding up the papers is another response mechanism. It's very low tech, but it works. And again, I was able to get some valuable information because first of all, I was able to see each child's response uninfluenced by other children's responses. And also I was able to see in this case how they spelled toilet, which gives me some additional useful information. So if I didn't see that OI, that would be a good hint to me that with that child I need some extra opportunity to keep working on representing hearing and then representing that OI sound in words. So at this point in the work together, I would review some of the words that had OI and that were in the story. We would read those together, in the riddle. And I would also pick out a few words that were in the text that reinforce letter-sound relationships I taught previously. So prior to doing the OI diphthong, I would very likely have worked on R-controlled vowels. And so I deliberately put a couple of words with R-controlled vowels in them into the text, and I would review those with students as a review. Also, the OA vowel team, I would take an opportunity to review that. And then I'd probably talk with the kids about the word wash, which is a strange one, right? You would think it would be wash, but it is wash. And so I'd probably take a little time with kids on that. Now at this point, the lesson's probably feeling pretty long to you, but remember that in the middle of this, I was demonstrating various features and commenting, this lesson's going to go a lot more quickly when your sole focus is clipping through the lesson. And indeed, going at a nice fast pace that's really active with kids is one of the most important things I can say about doing distance small group reading instruction. And of course, just like when you're in your classroom, if you can tell kids are getting antsy and the lesson is running too long, then you could cut components. Finally, I would give the kids a parting assignment, and the assignment that I had in mind here is twofold. First, I would ask the kids to read their What Is It papers to other people, and to facilitate this, I would likely text or email a link to those papers to families so that they also have access to it. Depending on my understanding of resources and other issues, I might suggest kids print those two What Is It's. I'd probably put them on the same page so that they're using less paper and ink, or same amount of ink, less paper. And then I would also give them an assignment to actually write their own What Is It for me to guess. And this is an activity that kids often find really fun. And you may find really fun to see their thinking pattern in terms of how they clue you in to what they're thinking of, or don't in some cases. So to sum up, in the OI lesson, the first step was to set a purpose for reading by discussing what students had been reading, and then talk about the fact that the lesson would help them read it even better. The second step was to engage children in saying the target sound, the OI sound, and there I've shown how it would be written in IPA. The next step was to engage students in listening for the OI sound in words. Then to provide explicit instruction associating the OI sound with the spellings OY and OI, with a particular focus today on OI. Then I engage students in actually writing the OI words, and then engage them in reading connected texts that included a number of words with OI in them. I had them read both individually and also chorally. In step 7, I had them review individual words that included OI and other phoneme-grapheme relationships that they've studied in the past or that I thought might have given them trouble in the reading. And finally, in step 8, I assigned children to meaningful reading and writing tasks that follow up from the lesson. Now I'm going to share a second, shorter example of a small group reading lesson at a distance. I'm going to focus this lesson with two goals, a content goal and a process goal. So the content goal is going to be around building knowledge related to food chains and food webs, and the process goal is going to be around building knowledge of flow diagrams. The following 3 slides that I'll be showing you are to help you understand a little bit more about flow diagrams, in case you're not familiar with that term or concept. These slides are adapted from a presentation that you can find free online at edweb.net. The presentation is called Strategies to Engage Young Learners with Informational Text, edweb.net. So what you're seeing on your screen is a surface diagram, and a surface diagram shows the parts of the surface of an object or living thing, in this case, the great horned owl. Another type of diagram is a flow diagram. In a flow diagram, rather than showing parts of something that's living or an object, it shows parts of a process. So in this case, a process having to do with the life cycle of salmon. Here's another example of a flow diagram. It's showing the process of drying fish for winter. These examples come from a PBS CPB Ready to Learn program produced by WGBH in Boston called Molly of Denali. I'm lucky to be a part of the Molly of Denali team, and if you'd like to learn more about it, go to pbskids.org, where you can access digital video games and videos of the program and lots of other resources. So now that you know a little bit more about flow diagrams, let's talk about what you would do before the small group lesson begins. So before the small group reading lesson begins, I'm going to assume that you've done some initial whole group work where you've introduced food chains and food webs and flow diagrams and so on. So now what you're doing is you're extending the learning, reinforcing the learning through a small group lesson. I'm I'm going to assume that you formed the group for this particular lesson using observation and assessment, as well as your knowledge of standards and development. I'm going to imagine that in this case you put 2 pairs of students together to form your group of 4, and that you paired those children using the dyad reading approach to forming partners or pairs. And if that doesn't sound familiar to you, you can look up dyad reading in Google Scholar, or you can check out K-3 module number 3 at literacyessentials.org. That's a free resource, and as part of that module number 3 for K-3, there's information about dyad reading. At the beginning of the lesson, we would set the project purpose. For example, we would talk about the project that's ongoing for children. Maybe their project is to prepare to deliver a presentation on food webs and food chains for younger students, or maybe their purpose is to assist a local a local ecologist with a field study related to food webs and food chains. So to remind students of the project purpose, that's the reason why the lesson is happening. Then I would engage children in a discussion, sharing some of the key points of what they've learned so far about food webs and food chains. And there's several ways we could run this discussion. One would be to just use open oral discussion. That means that all of the children in the video conferencing platform would be unmuted and kids can jump into the conversation as they see fit. Sometimes that particular format is difficult, as some of you may have experienced in an online platform. If there are delays due to poor internet or for other reasons, it can be sometimes difficult for people to be able to jump in when they want and need to, and to wait until others are finished and so on. If that's the case, you might want to use digital hand raising inside any video conferencing platform, I think, but certainly in Zoom, there's a place for attendees to be able to raise their hand, and for you as the host to be able to lower the hand as you see fit. You can also use good old-fashioned physical hand raising, but I think that digital is better in the sense that kids don't have to keep their hand up in the air a long time with digital hand raising, and you can control that and kind of monitor it, I think, a little bit more easily. Another option is that you could actually host this whole discussion ahead of time before the lesson begins using an asynchronous discussion platform like you might find in any number of different kinds of educational platforms such as Google Classroom. So those are all options for discussion at the beginning of the lesson. Once we move to the middle of the lesson, what we do is have children work with a partner to dyad read a text or a portion of a text about food chains. And their task would be to read that together and then decide on some key information from what they've read about food chains that they think they should know, their classmates should know, or that they should share for the project that they're doing. I would also ask students as a second task and part of their reading to actually collect examples of food chain flow diagrams. So now I'm going to demonstrate how you can put children into partners in a digital video conferencing platform for the purposes of an activity like this. So now I'm going to show you how I would use Zoom features to make what I've just described possible. So again, we're going to turn to our breakout rooms, which I'm opening here. First of all, I don't want to use the same breakout rooms that I did earlier, and so I'm going to recreate my breakout rooms. I'm going to recreate all rooms. This time, I'm going to have 2 rooms instead of 4 rooms, so I'm not going to have each student in an individual room this time. I'm going to have them in a room with their partner. Now, there are 2 ways you can do this, automatic and manual. When you do this automatically, what happens is it randomizes. And there are times when that's perfectly fine and fast, but in this case, I really want Annie and Shannon together. And so if I randomize, I run the risk that they won't be together. So I'm going to assign manually, okay? And in this case, it's going to help me, you can always rename a breakout room. And in this case, you don't really need to because you're going to see who's in the breakout room, and that's the point of it. But especially if you're working with larger groups of students, you might want to say, for example, if you're studying habitats, this is the Arctic habitat group. And this is the desert habitat group. So, okay, and I misspelled Arctic, so, you know, what can I say? We're all human. We'll get that fixed. Okay, so, and then you can decide who you're going to put in what. So as I mentioned, for my purposes, I want to put Annie in the same room with Shannon, and so I'm going to do that. And then here I'm going to assign, it's easy, the remaining two people, Ruth and Mila. And of course, for our purposes, this is, we're not talking about the Arctic habitat, so I'm going to rename the groups to something simpler, or I could have just left them unnamed because the important thing for me to know is who's in the group. Okay, so that's how I would use the breakout rooms. Once I open the rooms, Annie and Shannon can hear each other, Mila and Ruth can hear each other, but each pair can't hear the other. Okay, and then I can join each room just as I showed you earlier when everyone was in the same room. So that's how I would use the breakout room function to put kids into pairs to do their assigned work. Now, toward the end of the lesson, you would bring students back together as a whole and have them share some of their learning and the flow diagrams that they have found. I have links on the slide here to two of the many free online texts that you can find on the topic of food webs or food chains. Here are two that have food chain flow diagrams. And so I'm going to just show you each of those briefly now. So here's one free online text that deals with the topic of food chains, and that includes flow diagrams. I'm going to just show you a couple of examples so you see what I mean. And again, this is a freely available online text. Here's another freely available online text that also deals with food chains and also has flow diagrams. I'll take you through it quickly so that we can get to the part where you'll see a food chain flow diagram. And there it is. Now we're going to have the opportunity to hear from our coaches and just some of their reflections or some of what stood out to them over the course of the video presentation that you've been watching.
So now, several things. First of all, how you set the stage for the lesson I think is really great. I love that you just talked with teachers about, you know, doing that check-in with kids and making sure about that engagement piece, and part of that is like caring for them, right, like socially and emotionally, and making sure that they do know that first and foremost it's like, are they okay and how are they doing? So just that beginning part I thought was just so wonderful. And then, I mean, personally, I've learned a lot of different things that I hadn't thought of using before, so that's a little personal coach note about how to be using Zoom. But one of the things I'm hoping that people do is, like, I mean, I sat here and thought, here's different things I'm going to try when I do my Zooms that I haven't been trying, because I've been doing the very low tech way. But also letting people know that you have limited time with us, right? And so you're showing us all these different things in this one space. And so really be thinking about what is the purpose of the lesson that you're doing, who are the children that you're working with, and which one of these different things that you showed to us would work best for that audience. And be kind to yourself and do what you think. Like, don't put extra pressure on yourself. If you need to go low tech, but you give a really good lesson and kids are able to engage even with just thumbs up, thumbs down, because you're not able to do the other pieces. Sure. The most important part is that you're like creating a space where you're engaging and teaching kids with a purpose, and that they're walking away with knowledge. Again, I just love every kid had a chance to engage. Like, that's so important. I think every student would feel valued in this lesson and really learn something very important with explanation, practice, like the follow-up practice, and then the cooperative and collaborative share with a wrap-up of why it's important and then how to keep applying it. So
thank you for sharing all that, Annie. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
And now we'll hear from Ruth.
I really learned a lot. And I appreciated how you started talking about right at the beginning how that there's other platforms that have these same kind of tools, because in our county, we are told that we have to use WebEx now So I'm just really hoping, I can figure some of that out now on this other platform, because I was really comfortable with Zoom. But anyways, so I really felt like when you were sharing and kept saying the low tech piece, I think many teachers, administrators, coaches will really appreciate that, because I think that will build their confidence. I think right now we're in a space where there's so many unknowns. So I think that really helps relieve some of the stress for you to just, talk through the lesson, how you're implementing it, on this new platform that we've, been kind of forced to use. So I really appreciate that. And I also really enjoyed and appreciated too all the interaction for kids, and really being mindful of, again, that low tech where, some kids, like those ones playing Minecraft, right? They're going to be pretty tech savvy, but other ones might feel more comfortable with, their answers on paper, as well as a great way for us to see where do we have to reteach, and where is there more practice that needs to, to happen. And you really did a nice job pointing that out, and all those options and opportunities for us. And so, yeah, I really liked the routine of the lesson. I think we could definitely fit that into whatever needs our small groups have. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Shannon, any reflections you'd like to share?
Yes, and a lot of them are the same as Annie and Ruth and what they have shared, but I can really totally appreciate the active engagement and the low tech piece. And I can appreciate it because, we know the time that we're in a completely different shift, but this has helped me be able to have tools to let the coaches know, if you will, it's the same dance, it's just a different song. So I appreciate all of these tools, that it doesn't compromise the best practices that we know. Even though we're virtual, those best practices that we know are best for kids and learning are still there. So using the Zoom feature, or like Ruth said, if some aren't able to use Zoom, being able to help coaches figure out what are those ways to continue to have that active involvement, because that active engagement is sometimes tough within a classroom. So then to try to do it virtually, this is invaluable. This is very, very invaluable information. And I appreciate having these tools that then I can go out and help the teachers and the districts and administrators that we support here in Calhoun.
Thank you so much. And Mila, any reflections you want to share?
Well, the gift of being last is I can just say ditto to all the things that everyone else said. But the one thing I want to bring out is the fact that, especially with the second lesson, in the context of it being within a project, I think it was pretty powerful that it gives it purpose and some relevancy. Here, it's one thing to teach the content, which we know is super important, but another to have the kids have that, and I love how you utilize that breakout room. So for them to actually collaborate and to synergize and think through this context, this project that they're trying to be successful in, and use and apply those literacy skills that you've just taught them. So immediately you've been able to take the knowledge that they've learned and apply it right away in a collaborative setting. And that's pretty much what I think the one drawback with the online features, sometimes it becomes very teacher-centered, and this way, by using the context of a project as well as having those breakout rooms, we're creating that sense of, yes, we can learn from each other, and we can problem solve together and have those critical thinking skills. And so that's like the icing that on that cake that my colleagues here have shared already, that I think just puts it into a more relevant piece, especially now as a mom. I'm seeing my own kids needing that connectiveness, with their peers. And so this allows them to have that piece of that, again, maybe that bookend. You started out, Annie, with the social emotional piece, and for me to end it that way too.
So that concludes the presentation for today. Thank you so much for being with us and for all that you're doing, and I wish you the best of health in these difficult times.